January 15th, 1942, 9 a.m. The Bendler Block, Berlin. The conference room inside the Wehrmacht High Command smells of stale tobacco smoke, polished oak, and invincibility. Outside, the Third Reich is at the height of its power. The swastika flies from the Pyrenees to the gates of Moscow. Inside, General Friedrich Fromm, commander of the Reserve Army, flips through a dossier stamped Geheime Kommandosache, top secret. The file isn't about the Russians, it isn't about the British, it is about the new enemy, the United States. To the Prussian officers sitting around the table, men who have spent their entire lives studying the art of war, men who treat soldiering as a religion, the photos in the file look like a joke, a bad comedy sketch. You have to understand what an army looks like to a German general in 1942. The Wehrmacht is a machine built on decades of tradition. A German soldier spends 2 years in conscription. He is drilled until he is part of the collective organism. He is hardened by the Prussian discipline that dates back to Frederick the Great. But when Fromm looks at the reconnaissance photos of the American training camps in Louisiana and Tennessee, he doesn't see soldiers, he sees a mob. The photos show men in ill-fitting denim fatigues. They are wearing World War I doughboy helmets that look like soup bowls, and, most hilariously to the German officers, they aren't even holding rifles. They are holding broomsticks with the word gun painted on the side. The room erupts in laughter. It is a dry, cynical laughter. The intelligence report confirms it. The Americans are so short on equipment that they are using trucks with the word tank painted on the canvas sides to simulate armored divisions. They are using stovepipes to simulate mortars. To the German mind, this is pathetic. It is the behavior of a third-rate power. They are cowboys, a colonel sneers, lighting a cigarette. They are driving around in the mud playing cowboys and Indians. They have no discipline. They have no NCO corps. They are soft. This is the fatal assumption. The Germans look at the lack of equipment and see weakness. They look at the chaotic rush nature of the American mobilization and see incompetence. They believe that you cannot mass produce a soldier. A soldier must be crafted like a fine watch. But General Fromm stops laughing when he turns the page to the section marked Manpower Projections. The numbers don't make sense. In 1939, the U.S. Army was smaller than the Army of Portugal. It was the 19th largest army in the world, sandwiched between Bulgaria and Portugal. It had fewer than 200,000 men. But the report in Fromm's hand details something terrifying. It details the Selective Service Act. It details a plan not to train a few divisions, but to train a nation. The Americans aren't building an army the European way. They are building an army the way Henry Ford builds cars. The report describes vast tracts of land in the American South, camps like Benning, Bragg, and Hood that are larger than some German principalities. It describes a system where a raw civilian, a farm boy from Iowa or a clerk from Brooklyn, is processed, injected with vaccines, issued a uniform, and pushed onto an assembly line of training that runs 24 hours a day. The German officers argue. It is impossible, they say. You cannot take a civilian and make him a Panzer Grenadier in 13 weeks. They will be cannon fodder. They will break at the first sight of blood. They comfort themselves with their own superiority. They tell themselves that quality will always beat quantity. They tell themselves that the American soldier is a pampered, jazz-listening dilettante who needs ice cream and dry socks to function. But deep down, looking at the grainy aerial photos of the tent cities springing up across the American continent, a seed of doubt is planted. Because the trucks marked tank are disappearing, and in the latest photos, delivered by a spy in neutral Lisbon, the broomsticks are gone. They are being replaced by something else. Rows of semi-automatic M1 Garans, columns of M4 Sherman tanks stretching to the horizon. The circus is over. The assembly line has just been switched to high.
July 1942, Fort Benning, Georgia. 104 degrees in the shade. The red clay dust of Georgia coats everything. It is in the water, in the food, and deep in the lungs of 10,000 shouting men. If General Fromm could stand here now, he would see something that would offend his Prussian sensibilities to the core. He would see a chaotic, brawling mess. He would see a farm boy from Arkansas trying to explain to a street kid from the Bronx how to dig a latrine. He would see officers who look barely older than the men they are commanding, reading from manuals as they teach tactics they learned only yesterday. This is the 90-day wonder. The German officer corps is an aristocracy. To become a German lieutenant takes years of grooming, military academies, and social vetting. It is a priesthood of violence. The Americans? They took a car salesman, gave him an IQ test, shouted at him for 3 months in Officer Candidate School, OCS, pinned a gold bar on his collar, and told him he was now a leader of men. In Berlin, the intelligence reports on this instant officer corps are met with derision. They are amateurs leading amateurs, the analysis reads. They have no tactical intuition. They rely on maps they cannot read and radios that will break. But the Germans are missing the invisible weapon hidden inside the American recruit. They look at the lack of military tradition and see a void. They fail to see what fills that void: mechanical aptitude. The average German conscript in 1942 is a peasant. He grew up behind a horse-drawn plow. If a truck breaks down, he stares at it until a mechanic arrives. The Wehrmacht, for all its panzer glory, is still an army of horses. They use over 2.7 million horses to pull their supplies. The American recruit? He grew up with a Model T horde in the barn. He spent his teenage years taking apart radios, fixing tractors, and hot-wiring jalopies. He understands the internal combustion engine in his bones. When a Jeep breaks down in Georgia, the amateur American soldier doesn't wait for orders. He kicks the bumper, opens the hood, and fixes it with a piece of wire and a curse word. This is the assembly line army. It isn't pretty, it isn't polished, it doesn't march in a perfect goose step, but it moves. It moves with a speed and a mechanical fluidity that the rigid German hierarchy cannot comprehend. By late 1942, the sheer scale of the training begins to warp the reality of the war. The U.S. Army is growing by a division a week. They are building entire cities from scratch just to house the recruits. The Louisiana Maneuvers involve 400,000 men fighting a mock war across an area larger than Belgium. German intelligence officers in neutral countries start watching the American newsreels. They sit in darkened cinemas in Lisbon and Bern, smoking nervously. On the screen, they don't see broomsticks anymore. They see the M1 Garand, the first standard-issue semi-automatic rifle in history. While the German soldier is still cycling the bolt of his Kar 98K after every shot, a design from 1898, the American cowboy can fire 8 rounds as fast as he can pull the trigger. They see the artillery, miles of 105mm howitzers, and they see the faces. These aren't the faces of beaten-down conscripts. They are the faces of a generation fed on meat and milk, bursting with an aggressive, cocky energy. They look at the camera and smile. They look inevitable. But training is not war. Firing at paper targets in Tennessee is not the same as facing the Afrika Korps in the desert. The German generals cling to their last hope: experience. They believe that when these 90-day wonders meet the veterans of the Eastern Front, the assembly line will break. They believe the Americans will panic. And initially, they are right. November 1942, Operation Torch. The Americans land in North Africa. They are green. They are sloppy. Their radios jam. Their tanks drive into ditches. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass, the veteran panzers under Rommel slam into the American 1st Armored Division. It is a slaughter. The Americans break. They run. They abandon their equipment. In Berlin, the champagne corks pop. The reports confirm everything the Prussians believed. The Americans are soft. They cannot fight. They are a mob with expensive toys. But they are celebrating the wrong thing. They are celebrating a tactical victory while ignoring a strategic catastrophe. Because after the battle, something terrifying happens. The American army doesn't collapse. It doesn't sue for peace. It doesn't retreat to the coast. It learns. The 90-day wonders pick themselves up from the dust of Kasserine. They fire the incompetent generals. They bring in a new man, a man named George C. Patton, and they go back to school. The Germans thought Kasserine Pass proved the Americans were weak. In reality, it just made them angry.
July 1944. The hedgerows of Saint-Lô, France. The laughter in the Berlin conference room has long since died out. It has been replaced by a grim, silent horror. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stands in a bunker overlooking the Normandy coast. He is exhausted. For weeks, his elite panzer divisions, the Das Reich, the Lehr, had been hammering the Americans. By all the rules of war that Rommel learned in the military academy, the Americans should be finished. He has destroyed their tanks, he has mauled their infantry battalions, he has inflicted casualties that would cause a German division to crumble or mutiny. But the Americans are still there. This is the nightmare of the assembly line army. It operates like a hydra. You cut off one head and two more appear, shipped overnight from New Jersey. Rommel picks up a report from the front. It details a skirmish near Saint-Lô. A German Tiger tank company wiped out a platoon of American Shermans in the morning, a clear tactical victory. But by the afternoon, the American unit was back. Not just back, restored. The American recovery teams had dragged the wrecks away. The quartermasters had issued brand new tanks, smelling of fresh paint, with engines that actually worked. And the 90-day wonders, those replacements trained in the hurried camps of Georgia, were climbing into the hatches. They weren't the best tankers in the world. They were terrified. They were raw, but there were so many of them. The German soldier, by contrast, is fighting a lonely war of attrition. If a Tiger tank breaks a track, it is abandoned because there are no spare parts. If a German veteran dies, he is replaced by a terrified teenager or an old man with a stomach ulcer because the Reich has run out of military-aged men. The German generals realized too late that they misunderstood the American strategy. They thought the Americans were trying to build a better army. They weren't. They were building a disposable army. It is a brutal calculus. The Americans treat war like a business. They calculate the cost of a hill in tons of steel and gallons of blood, and they pay the bill without blinking. A captured German officer, interrogated by the U.S. 29th Division, sums up the despair spreading through the Wehrmacht ranks. He looks at his captors, men smoking Lucky Strikes, drinking fresh coffee, sitting on piles of ammunition crates that seem to touch the sky. "We have to stop to count our bullets," the German says quietly. "You Americans, you just shoot until the barrel melts, and then you get a new gun." The mob that Fromm laughed at in 1942 has transformed into a relentless, grinding machine. It lacks the elegance of the Prussian military tradition. It is loud, wasteful, and often clumsy, but it is crushing the Wehrmacht simply by leaning on it. And as the Allies break out of Normandy and race toward the German border, the German High Command is forced to confront the final, humiliating irony of their defeat. They are being beaten by the very people they despised: the clerks, the farmers, the mechanics, the amateurs who learned to fight by reading a manual on the boat over.
March 17, 1945. The Ludendorff Bridge, Remagen, Germany. The Rhine River is the sacred moat of the German fatherland. For centuries, it has been the barrier that stopped invaders. But today, the moat is full of traffic. On the hills overlooking the river, a German machine gunner watches in paralyzed awe. He isn't firing. He has no ammunition left. He is simply a spectator to the end of his world. Below him, the Americans are crossing. But they aren't crossing in heroic, desperate waves like they did at Omaha Beach. They are crossing like commuters. It is a bumper-to-bumper traffic jam of green steel. M26 Pershing tanks, deuce-and-a-half trucks,
fuel tankers, mobile kitchens, postal vans. The bridge groans under the weight of an army that travels with more luxuries than a German civilian has seen in 5 years. The German soldier watches as an American truck driver leans out of his cab, smoking a cigar, honking his horn at a tank that is moving too slowly. This is the ultimate humiliation for the Wehrmacht. They aren't being defeated by tactical genius. They are being defeated by a traffic jam. In a bunker nearby, Field Marshal Walter Model, once Hitler's favorite fireman, stares at a map that is entirely red. He realizes now the scale of the mistake they made in 1942. They thought the American mob would break under the strain of war. Instead, the war hardened the mob. The 90-day wonders are no longer green. They are now 20-year-old veterans with the eyes of old men. They have survived Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France. They have learned the trade of killing. But what truly breaks the German spirit isn't the American soldier's skill, it is his supply line. A captured German general, standing by the roadside as a POW, watches the convoy roll past. He sees a truck filled with nothing but fresh socks. He sees another truck filled with turkeys for Thanksgiving dinner. He sees a specialized barge floating down the river that does nothing but make ice cream. He turns to his American captor. "We ran out of fuel for our King Tigers 3 days ago," he says, his voice hollow. "And you brought chocolate cake across the ocean." The army of toys has become an unstoppable force of nature. The broomsticks are gone, replaced by the atomic bomb of logistics. The German generals realized too late that they were fighting a war of arithmetic, and they had crunched the numbers wrong. May 8th, 1945. A prisoner of war camp, Augsburg. The war is over. The Third Reich, the 1,000-year empire, has lasted 12 years and ended in rubble. Hermann Göring, the Reichsmarshal, who once sneered that Americans are only good for making razor blades and refrigerators, sits in a folding chair. He is stripped of his medals. He is just a fat man in a gray uniform. He is interviewed by the very men he mocked, intelligence officers who were car salesmen and lawyers 3 years ago. When asked why Germany lost, the German High Command didn't point to a specific battle. They didn't point to D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge. They pointed to the smokestacks of Detroit and the drill sergeants of Georgia. They admitted that the moment they saw the Americans could train millions of men without breaking their economy, they knew the hourglass had been turned over. The photos of the broomstick training in 1941 were not a joke. They were a warning. They showed a nation that was willing to start from zero and sprint to the finish line. The legacy of that mobilization is still with us. The United States Army that marched into Berlin wasn't built on centuries of tradition. It was built on the terrifying, chaotic, beautiful idea that a free man, given a rifle and a reason to fight, can outlast any machine. The generals laughed at the broomsticks, but in the end, it was the cowboys who marched down the Unter den Linden. And the only sound left in Berlin was the roar of an American engine.